Rachel Okonkwo sat in her office reviewing trade contracts when her communicator exploded with incoming alerts. The urgent signals made her stomach drop before she even read the first message. 3 human children were being held in a Vral detention facility on Station Tertius 9, and the words "criminal containment" appeared in every single report. She transported to the station within the hour, her diplomatic credentials getting her through security checkpoints that would have stopped anyone else. The facility administrator, a tall Vral named Threll, met her at the entrance with what his species considered a polite greeting. His chitinous face showed no emotion as he explained the situation in clipped, efficient tones. 3 juvenile humans violated preservation, Statute 47-Delta, Threll said, pulling up holographic records. They removed protected botanical specimens from the conservation garden. Standard detention protocols were applied. Rachel forced herself to stay calm. Where are they now? Cell Block 7, Units 12 through 14, Threll gestured down a corridor. They await council adjudication in 3 standard days. 3 days, Rachel felt her professional composure cracking. Take me to them now. The detention block was designed for adult criminals from species that averaged twice human size. Harsh lighting glared off metallic walls, and the temperature was set for Vral comfort, meaning it was freezing by human standards. Rachel heard crying before she saw the cells. Lily sat in the first cell, a 6-year-old girl with tear-stained cheeks and a dress covered in dirt. She was curled in the corner of a space designed to hold something much larger and much less fragile. When she saw Rachel, she ran to the force field barrier. "Please let me out," Lily sobbed. "I want my mommy. I didn't mean to be bad." Rachel's heart shattered. She turned to Threll with barely controlled fury. "You put a 6-year-old child in a criminal detention cell." "The human female is small, yes, but her biological age indicates she is capable of understanding law," Threll replied, consulting his datapad. "Human juveniles can walk and communicate, therefore they are responsible for their actions." "How long have they been here?" Rachel demanded. 8.3 hours. "Have they been fed?" Threll looked confused by the question. "Nutrition dispensers are available in each cell." Rachel checked the dispenser in Lily's cell. It contained a gray protein paste designed for Vral dietary needs. A human child couldn't eat it without getting sick. She moved to the next cell where 9-year-old Oscar sat staring at the wall in shock. The boy didn't even respond when she called his name. The third cell held Nina, 12 years old and trying desperately to be brave. She had her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "Are you here to take us home?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Rachel promised. "I'm getting you out of here right now." She turned to Threll. "Release them immediately. This is a diplomatic incident of the highest severity." "I cannot release detainees without council authorization," Threll said. "Procedure requires." "I don't care about your procedures." Rachel's voice went cold. "You have imprisoned 3 human children for picking flowers. Do you understand what you've done?" "They violated." "They are children," Rachel interrupted. 6, 9, and 12 years old, their brains are still developing. They don't have the capacity to understand complex preservation laws. In human society, they would be considered innocents incapable of criminal intent. Threll's head tilted in what might have been confusion. "But they can walk, talk, and perform complex tasks. How are they not responsible beings?" Rachel realized with growing horror that Threll genuinely didn't understand. The Vral matured rapidly, reaching full adult cognition within 2 years of hatching. The concept of an extended childhood was completely alien to him. He had treated these terrified children exactly as he would treat small adults because in his worldview, that's what they were. In human development, children don't reach full brain maturity until their mid-20s, Rachel explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "These 3 are babies by our standards. They need protection, care, and patience, not imprisonment." "This information was not in the briefing documents," Threll said, sounding uncertain for the first time. It was in the cultural integration files that every species is supposed to review. Rachel pulled up the relevant documents on her own communicator. Section 12, Subsection 4, Human Juvenile Development and Legal Status. Threll was silent. Rachel pressed her advantage. You need to release them now, or this situation will escalate beyond anything you're prepared for. I must consult with Council Overseer Printh. Threll moved toward his communication panel. While he was distracted, Rachel sent out an urgent message on every human frequency she could access. Within minutes, responses flooded back. Human ships in nearby sectors were already changing course toward Tertius 9. The civilian network was mobilizing. Captain Bates Sterling, a cargo hauler who happened to be 3 systems away, sent a simple reply. On my way. Nobody touches our kids. Rachel sat down on the floor outside Lily's cell. The little girl pressed her hand against the force field, and Rachel matched it from her side. I'm not leaving you, she said softly. I'm staying right here until you're out. Oscar finally moved, coming to his cell barrier. Are we in trouble? He asked in a small voice. No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. Rachel's voice was gentle. The adults made a mistake, a big one. Threll returned from his consultation. Overseer Printh confirms that proper procedure was followed. The juveniles will remain in custody pending the council hearing. Then I'll wait with them. Rachel settled more comfortably against the wall. And you should know that I've contacted Earth directly. Every human in this sector is about to learn what happened here. That seems like an excessive response to a minor regulatory violation, Threll observed. Rachel looked at him with an expression that made even the emotionally distant Vrall take a step back. You locked up human children. Have you lost your mind? Her communicator chimed with incoming messages. Dozens of them, then hundreds. The human community was waking up to what had happened, and their response was building like a wave. You're about to learn something about humanity, Rachel said quietly. We forgive almost anything, but you don't touch our children ever. 14 hours after the children were locked up, Tertius 9 found itself surrounded by human vessels. Cargo haulers, passenger transports, even a few research ships had converged on the station in what they claimed was routine traffic. Station control knew better. Every human within 3 systems had found a reason to be nearby. Captain Bates Sterling docked her freighter and marched straight to the detention facility. She was 70 years old with silver hair, and the kind of determination that came from raising 5 children and 15 grandchildren. The Vrall guards didn't know how to process her when she simply sat down next to Rachel outside the cells. Anyone tries to move me, they'll have to explain it to my crew, Bate announced. And my crew includes 4 other ships that just happened to dock in the last hour. More humans arrived throughout the day. They didn't threaten, didn't demand. They just came and stayed. The corridor outside the detention cells became crowded with humans who sat quietly waiting. Some brought blankets, others brought food suitable for children. All of them stared at Threll and his staff with expressions that needed no translation. Overseer Printh arrived from the council chambers looking deeply annoyed. He was a methodical being from a species that valued order above all else. This congregation is irregular, he announced. You must disperse. We're not breaking any laws, Rachel replied calmly. We're simply waiting in a public corridor. Your presence is disruptive. Then release the children. Printh's facial tendrils twitched with irritation. The council will address this matter in 2.5 days. Until then, proper procedure must be followed. A human woman pushed through the crowd. Dr. Amara Os carried credentials that identified her as one of Earth's leading child psychologists. I need to examine those children immediately, she demanded. They've been held in inappropriate conditions for over 14 hours. That is not necessary, Threll said. Medical scans show they are physically healthy. Physical health isn't the concern. Amara pulled out her own scanning equipment. You've traumatized them. I need to document the psychological damage. Printh considered this. You may conduct your examination, but it will not affect the hearing schedule. Amara worked quickly, running scans and assessments through the force field since Threll still refused to lower them. Her face grew darker with each reading. When she finished, she turned to Printh with barely contained anger. "These children are exhibiting severe stress responses," she reported. "Elevated cortisol, disrupted neural patterns consistent with acute trauma, and signs of dissociation in the middle child. Every hour they spend here causes measurable harm to their developing brains." "Developing," Printh repeated the word as if he'd never heard it before. "Human children don't have fully formed brains," Amara explained. "The prefrontal cortex, responsible for judgment and impulse control, doesn't finish developing until the mid-20s. These three have brains that are still growing, still forming critical neural connections. Trauma during this period can cause permanent damage." Across the station, other species were beginning to pay attention to the human response. A Krill diplomat named Vess watched the news feeds with scientific fascination. His species hatched fully independent, ready to swim and hunt within hours. The idea of a dependent juvenile lasting years was fascinating and somewhat disturbing. "They protect their young for over 2 decades, Vess murmured to his colleague. "No wonder they react this strongly. Their offspring are vulnerable for longer than most species' entire lifespans." An avian diplomat called Churik had been reviewing human cultural files. "Look at their entertainment," she said, displaying examples. "Every story features the protection of young as a central theme. It's woven into their entire civilization." Back at the detention center, Senator Hiroshi Tanaka arrived with a legal team. He was Earth's senior representative to the council, and his presence signaled that this was now an official diplomatic crisis. He reviewed Amara's findings and then turned to Printh. "On behalf of Earth, I am filing formal charges against Warden Threll and this facility for child endangerment, unlawful detention of minors, and violation of sentient rights." His voice was calm, but his eyes were hard. "Furthermore, I am demanding immediate release of the detainees into human custody." "The Council will review your charges at the scheduled hearing," Printh said stiffly. "Not good enough." Senator Tanaka activated a holographic display. "I have documentation here showing that human juvenile protection protocols were included in our integration agreements. Section 12 clearly states that humans under 18 years are to be treated as legal dependents requiring guardian consent for any official proceedings. This detention violated our treaty rights." Printh reviewed the documents. His tendrils went very still. This section was marked as cultural information, not legal requirement. "It's both," Hiroshi's voice could have cut steel, "and your failure to recognize that has created an interstellar incident." A message came through on the station's main communication system. Admiral Patricia Hughes of the human fleet requested permission to enter the system. Her battle group was 8 hours out. The request was polite, professional, and absolutely terrifying to anyone who understood what it meant. Printh's composure finally cracked. "This is an enormous overreaction to a procedural error." "You imprisoned our children," Bates Sterling spoke up from her seat on the floor. "You took babies, put them in cages, and left them to be terrified and alone. What exactly did you think would happen?" "We followed standard protocol," Threll said, sounding lost. "How were we to know?" "You were supposed to read the integration files," Rachel said quietly. "You were supposed to understand who we are before you touched our young." After 22 hours in detention, Printh finally authorized the children's release. The moment the force fields dropped, Rachel and Amara rushed in. Lily attached herself to Rachel and wouldn't let go. Oscar needed to be carried out, still barely responsive. Nina walked out on her own but held Amara's hand so tightly her knuckles were white. The crowd of humans in the corridor parted silently as the children were led to the human embassy section. No one cheered. No one celebrated. Their eyes remained fixed on the Vral officials with an intensity that made those officials deeply uncomfortable. Outside the facility, Rachel held Lily while the child finally fell into exhausted sleep. Bates stood beside her, and beyond them the gathered humans waited. "It's not over," Rachel said softly. "They still don't understand." Bate nodded. "Then we make them understand. We're not leaving until they do. Children are not negotiable." 3 days after the children's release, the Galactic Council convened in emergency session. The main chamber was packed with representatives from hundreds of species, all of them aware that something unprecedented was happening. Human ships still surrounded the station, and more arrived each day. This wasn't an invasion, but it was definitely a statement. Rachel stood before the council with Professor Wei Chen, a developmental psychologist from Earth. Printh had agreed to hear their presentation, though his body language suggested he considered it a formality before declaring the matter closed. "Let me show you what you did," Rachel began, projecting brain scans onto the main display. "This is a human child's brain at age 6. These areas in red are still forming. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and impulse control, won't be fully developed for another 15 to 20 years. A Krill representative named Vess leaned forward with interest. "Your young are neurologically incomplete for 2 decades. "Yes," Wei stepped forward. "Human children are born extremely helpless compared to most species. It takes years before they can survive independently. During this time, their brains are exceptionally vulnerable to trauma." The display changed to show the scans taken from Lily, Oscar, and Nina. Areas of the brain lit up in angry red patterns. "This is what 22 hours in your detention facility did," Wei continued. "Elevated stress hormones, disrupted neural development, and activation of trauma responses that may affect them for years. You didn't just scare them. You injured them at a neurological level." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Some species seemed genuinely shocked, while others remained skeptical. Ambassador Krell, a reptilian diplomat, spoke up. "This seems like biological weakness," he said bluntly. "Why should the Council accommodate species with such fragile offspring?" Before Rachel could respond, another voice rang out, "Because we all started somewhere." An elderly being entered the chamber, moving slowly on 6 legs. This was Ambassador Torth, representing a granite-based species that lived for thousands of years. His presence commanded immediate respect. "My people have a juvenile period of 50 years, Torth continued. "We understand what humans are trying to explain. The young are not simply small adults. They are incomplete beings who require protection while they grow into themselves." Printh's tendrils twitched. "With respect, Ambassador Torth, creating special protocols for biologically immature beings would complicate Council operations significantly." "More complicated than this." Senator Hiroshi gestured to the displays showing the human fleet presence. "More complicated than having an entire species ready to go to war over 3 children." "That response is disproportionate," Printh insisted. Rachel's voice went very quiet. "Is it? Let me tell you what humanity sees. We see a council that took our most vulnerable, our most precious, and locked them in cages. We see officials who couldn't be bothered to read basic cultural information before handling our young. We see a system that cares more about procedure than about preventing harm to children." She paused, letting that sink in. "And yes, we responded with overwhelming force. Because if you'll do this to 3 children over picking flowers, what will you do the next time? What about the next human family that doesn't understand your regulations? What about the next child who makes a mistake?" Threll, who had been sitting silently throughout the proceedings, suddenly stood. "May I speak?" Printh looked surprised but nodded. Threll approached the display showing the children's brain scans. He studied them for a long moment. "I watched the recordings," he said quietly. "Of the detention. I watched those 3 small humans cry and shake and call for their parents. At the time, I thought they were simply being dramatic. Now I understand they were experiencing genuine neurological distress that my scans couldn't detect." He turned to face Rachel. "I was taught that any being who can walk and communicate is responsible for their actions. I applied that standard to your young. I was wrong. I hurt them, and I didn't even know I was doing it." The chamber went very quiet. Seeing a Vrall admit error was unusual. Seeing one show emotional distress was almost unheard of. The information was in the files, Threll continued. I didn't read them. I assumed human biology was close enough to standard that I didn't need to. That assumption led me to traumatize 3 innocent beings. The ambassador is right. We failed at the most basic level of cultural integration. A new voice entered the discussion. Reporter 6, a krilled journalist who had been covering the story, projected footage from human entertainment media. I've been studying human culture, 6 said. Their stories, their laws, their entire social structure revolves around protecting the young. They have an entire emotion dedicated to it. Parental love, they call it. The footage showed human parents with their children. The tenderness, the protective instincts, the fierce devotion. It was behavior most species only exhibited for days or weeks after reproduction. Humans maintained it for decades. We need to understand what we're dealing with, 6 continued. Humans don't just protect their offspring, they protect all young humans, the crowd that gathered at the detention center. Most of them weren't related to those 3 children. They came anyway, because in human psychology, all children are everyone's responsibility. Ambassador Torth spoke again. I mentioned earlier that my people lost young ones over the past centuries. 3 deaths in council custody ruled accidental. His voice carried centuries of grief. We accepted it. We told ourselves it was the price of integration. Now I look at the human response and I wonder, did we fail our own children by not demanding better? Rachel saw her opening. We're not asking you to adopt human values. We're asking you to recognize that different species have different developmental needs. We're proposing juvenile sentient protection protocols, universal standards for identifying and protecting immature members of all species. She displayed the draft protocols. They included guidelines for recognizing juveniles, requirements for species-appropriate care, trained personnel, and safeguards against the kind of mistake that had led to this crisis. This isn't about humans, Rachel emphasized. This is about preventing what happened to those 3 children from happening to anyone's young, about building a council that's truly equipped to handle the diversity it claims to represent. Printh studied the proposal. This would require significant resources, new facilities, training programs, oversight committees. Yes, Rachel met his gaze. It would. What price do you put on a child's well-being? The chamber erupted in debate. Some supported the protocols immediately, others raised concerns about cost and complexity. Ambassador Krell argued it was human overreach. Torth countered that it was long overdue. Through it all, Rachel stood quietly. Outside, the human fleet waited, and across the galaxy, millions of humans watched, ready to do whatever it took to protect not just their own children, but all children. Because that, Rachel reflected, was what made them human. 2 weeks into the crisis, the debate still raged across galactic networks. The juvenile sentient protection protocols had divided the council in ways no one had anticipated. What started as a simple human demand had evolved into something much larger, a fundamental questioning of how the galaxy treated its most vulnerable members. Youth advocate Petra Williams arrived from Earth to support Rachel's efforts. She had spent 30 years working with traumatized children across dozens of conflicts and disasters. Her presence brought a new dimension to the human argument. Let me tell you about the cost of ignoring children's needs, Petra addressed a smaller council committee. Not in credits or resources, but in damaged lives and broken societies. She displayed case studies from Earth's own history. Civilizations that had failed to protect their young, wars that had traumatized entire generations, systems that had treated children as small adults with predictably terrible results. We learned these lessons the hard way, Petra continued. We made these mistakes ourselves. We're trying to spare you the same pain. But the opposition was organizing. Trade Commissioner Vorp, a being whose species valued efficiency above all else, had become the unofficial leader of those against the protocols. The human proposal would cost an estimated 40 billion credits to implement across council space, Vorp argued. It would slow trade processing, complicate security procedures, and create massive bureaucratic overhead. All for what? To accommodate a handful of species with extended juvenile periods. 40 billion credits, Rachel repeated when she heard this. The council spends twice that on decorative lighting in administrative buildings. Don't tell me this is about money. But Vorp's argument was gaining support, particularly among commercial interests who saw the protocols as an expensive burden on their operations. Shipping companies didn't want delays for additional checks on juvenile passengers. Security firms didn't want to retrain personnel. Station operators didn't want to build specialized facilities. Then something unexpected happened. A representative from a species called the Quellan requested to address the full council. The Quellan were rarely seen in council chambers. They kept to themselves, avoiding galactic politics. Their presence immediately drew attention. The Quellan representative was an elder matriarch named Cecil. She moved slowly, her body showing the weight of centuries. When she spoke, her voice carried a sorrow that silenced even the loudest opponents. "My people have a juvenile period of 15 years, Cecil began. Our young are helpless during this time, completely dependent on adults for survival. 50 years ago, we began expanding into council space. We were excited to join the greater galactic community." She paused and the chamber waited. "We lost our first child within a month, a security incident at a trade station. Our young one was separated from their parent and placed in standard holding. No one understood their needs. They died alone and afraid." The display showed records of the incident, filed away as an accident, barely investigated. Cecil continued. "We lost 2 more over the following decade. Each time the council expressed regret and moved on. We were told these things happen, that we needed to be more careful, that our young should stay home if they couldn't follow standard procedures." Her voice hardened. "So we withdrew. We stopped traveling in council space. We kept our families isolated in our home system. We chose exclusion over risking our children. And now I watch humanity face the same choice, and I wonder, how many species have made it? How many civilizations have we driven away because we couldn't be bothered to accommodate their young?" The impact was immediate. Council members who had dismissed the protocols as human overreach suddenly had to confront the reality that this pattern had existed for decades, that the system's failures weren't isolated incidents but systemic problems. Ambassador Torth rose again. "Elder Cecil speaks truth. My people also lost young ones to council negligence, 3 deaths over 2 centuries. We normalized it. We accepted it as the cost of participation. We failed our children by not demanding what humanity now demands." Vorp tried to regain control. "These tragedies are regrettable, but they represent statistical outliers. The vast majority of interactions proceed smoothly." "Tell that to the dead children." Rachel's voice cut through the chamber like ice. "Tell that to their parents. Tell that to every species that has chosen isolation over risking their young in your care." Petra stepped forward. "You want to talk statistics? Let's talk statistics. I've documented 47 incidents over the past century where juveniles from long development species were mistreated in council custody. That's just the ones that made it into official records. How many more went unreported? How many families just quietly left and never came back?" The data scrolled across the displays. Each incident represented a child who had been hurt, traumatized, or killed because no one understood their needs. The pattern was undeniable. The longer a species' childhood, the worse their young fared in mixed-species spaces. A moderate faction began to form, led by Ambassador Churich. "Perhaps we need to reframe this discussion," she suggested. "This isn't about bowing to human demands. It's about recognizing a fundamental flaw in our integration protocols. We assumed biological diversity but didn't account for developmental diversity." "Exactly," Senator Hiroshi seized on this. "You built a system for adult beings. Then you were surprised when it failed children. That's not a species-specific problem. That's a design flaw." The vote was scheduled for 3 days hence. Both sides lobbied furiously. Vorp continued pushing the cost argument. Rachel and her team focused on the moral imperative. Across human space, millions watched and waited. On the second day before the vote, something happened that changed everything. Security detected a threat against the council chambers. Someone had sent an anonymous message warning that the vote would be interrupted if it proceeded. Captain Liu, commanding the human fleet presence, immediately offered assistance. "We're already here," she said. "Let us help secure the station." Printh was forced to accept. Suddenly, Tertius 9 was full of human security personnel working alongside council forces. The humans were professional, efficient, and absolutely dedicated to ensuring the vote happened safely. "You're protecting the council that imprisoned your children," a Vral officer observed to one of the human guards. "We're protecting democracy," the human replied. "Even when we disagree with people, we believe in their right to make decisions. That's what civilization means." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Humanity had responded to the detention of 3 children with overwhelming force. But now they were using that same force to protect the council's right to potentially vote against human interests. On the eve of the vote, Rachel received a message from Lily's parents. They had been away on a research mission when the detention happened, returning to find their children traumatized and the galaxy in upheaval. "Thank you," the message said simply, "for fighting for our babies, for fighting for all babies." Rachel looked out at the human ships surrounding the station, at the gathered delegates preparing to vote, at the millions of beings across the galaxy watching this moment. Tomorrow they would know. Tomorrow the council would decide if protecting children was worth the cost, and humanity would be watching. The council chamber filled early on the morning of the vote. Representatives from hundreds of species took their seats while across the galaxy, billions watched on live feeds. This had become more than a vote on protocols. It had become a referendum on what kind of civilization they wanted to be. Rachel sat in the human delegation section with Senator Hiroshi and Petra. Behind them, Captain Bates Sterling had insisted on attending. "I started this journey sitting on a detention center floor," she said. "I'm going to see it through." The children were there too. Lily, Oscar, and Nina sat with their parents in a special viewing area. It had been a controversial decision to bring them, but Rachel had argued that the council needed to remember who this was really about. High Arbiter Quellen called the session to order. His ancient voice carried the weight of centuries. "We gather to vote on the juvenile sentient protection protocols, but before we proceed, there has been a request. The young humans wish to address this body." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the chamber. Printh looked uncomfortable. "That is highly irregular." "So is detaining children in criminal facilities," Quellen replied. "I will hear them." Nina stood first. At 12, she was still visibly affected by her ordeal, but she walked to the speaking platform with determination. Her parents held Lily and Oscar, who weren't ready to speak but wanted to be present. "I don't understand a lot of what happened," Nina began, her voice quiet but steady. "I don't understand the laws we broke or why picking flowers was so bad. I'm just a kid. I make mistakes because I'm still learning." She looked around the chamber. "When the guards came, I thought they would explain what we did wrong and take us to our parents. Instead, they put us in cells. I was so scared." Lily cried for hours. Oscar stopped talking. "I didn't know if we'd ever get out." Her voice wavered, but she continued. "Everyone keeps talking about protocols and costs and procedures, but I just want to know, don't your children deserve to feel safe? Don't they deserve adults who understand they're still learning? Don't they deserve to make mistakes without being treated like criminals?" She stepped back, and the chamber was absolutely silent. Then Lily surprised everyone by standing. Her parents tried to stop her, but she shook her head. She walked to the platform and had to stand on a step to reach the microphone. "I was scared," Lily said simply, "and nobody cared. I want to go home now." She walked back to her mother and buried her face in her shoulder. In that moment, watching a 6-year-old seek comfort after reliving her trauma, something shifted in the chamber. Trade Commissioner Vorp rose to speak. While the emotional testimony is moving, we must consider practical realities. 40 billion credits is not a trivial sum. Elder Cecil cut him off. I will fund the first phase personally, 10 billion credits from Quellen Resources. Consider it payment for the children we lost because you couldn't be bothered to protect them. Torth stood. My people will contribute another 10 billion. Consider it an apology for accepting mediocrity when our young deserved better. One by one, other species began pledging resources. Not all of them, and not enough to cover everything, but enough to show that this wasn't just a human concern anymore. The cost argument was crumbling. Ambassador Krell made one last attempt. This is emotional manipulation. We're being pressured to vote based on sentiment rather than logic. Rachel stood. You're right. It is emotional, because protecting children should be emotional. The day we make decisions about vulnerable beings based solely on cold logic is the day we lose any claim to being civilized. She activated a display. You want logic? Here's logic. Species with secure childhoods produce more stable adults. Stable adults build better societies. Better societies make better trading partners and allies. Protecting children isn't just moral, it's practical. The return on investment in child welfare is documented across every civilization that's measured it. But more than that, she continued, how you treat the helpless reveals who you are. You can have all the advanced technology and impressive accomplishments you want, but if you can't be kind to a scared child, what does any of it mean? Quellen raised his hand for silence. The arguments have been heard. We will now vote. The juvenile sentient protection protocols require a simple majority to pass. Each representative will register their position. The voting began. The display showed results in real time. At first it was close, swinging back and forth as different species registered their choices. Rachel held her breath. Beside her, Petra gripped the armrest so hard her knuckles were white. Ambassador Krell voted against, as expected, but to everyone's surprise, 3 members of his delegation broke ranks and voted in favor. Vorp voted against. But even some commercial interests, swayed by the cost-sharing offers, voted yes. The numbers climbed, 700 votes in favor, 720. It was going to be close. Rachel watched the count tick upward, 847 in favor, 312 against, 76 abstentions. The protocols had passed. The chamber erupted. Some species cheered, others sat in stunned silence. The human delegation embraced. Petra was crying, Bait was laughing. Rachel just felt exhausted relief wash over her. Quellen's voice cut through the celebration. The juvenile sentient protection protocols are hereby adopted as council law. Implementation will begin immediately. I am establishing a Department of Juvenile Affairs to oversee enforcement. Dr. Petra Williams, if you will accept, I would like you to serve as cross-species advisor. Petra looked shocked. Yes, of course. Threll approached Rachel. He moved hesitantly, aware that she might not want to see him. Ambassador, he said quietly, I have requested transfer to the new department. I want to help develop the training protocols. I want to make sure no one else makes my mistakes. Rachel studied him. She could see genuine remorse in his body language. That would be appropriate, she said finally. You understand now what you didn't before. Use that knowledge to teach others. The aftermath took weeks to sort out. New facilities had to be designed. Personnel needed training. Species-specific care guidelines had to be written. But it was happening. The galaxy was changing. 3 months later, Rachel attended the opening of the first specialized juvenile care facility on Tertius 9. It had age-appropriate spaces, trained caregivers who understood developmental needs, and protocols for dozens of species. Lily, Oscar, and Nina were there for the ceremony. The station had built a garden as part of the facility. Lily approached Rachel shyly. Can we pick the flowers? She asked. These ones, yes, Rachel smiled. These were planted just for you. The children ran into the garden, laughing. Around them, young beings from a dozen species played safely, protected by laws that recognized their vulnerability. cared for by adults who understood their needs. High Arbiter Quellen stood beside Rachel. We thought we were civilized because we could reach the stars, he said quietly. Humanity taught us we become civilized when we remember to carry the young with us. Rachel watched the children play. Human, Quellen, Krill, even a young Vral, all of them safe, all of them protected. That's all we ever wanted, she said. For every child to be seen as a child, to be protected not despite their vulnerability but because of it. Bait appeared beside them, her usual energy subdued into something thoughtful. My youngest grandchild asked me why we did all this, she said. Why we brought ships and made demands and turned the galaxy upside down over 3 kids picking flowers. What did you tell her? Rachel asked. I told her that's what we do, Bait smiled. We protect the ones who can't protect themselves. We fight for the ones who don't have a voice. And we never, ever give up on keeping children safe. Because if we lose that, we lose everything that makes us worth the stars we travel through. Across the garden, Lily waved to them, a flower in her hand. She was smiling. The fear had finally left her eyes, and in that smile, Rachel saw the future they had fought for. A galaxy where every child could feel safe, could make mistakes, could learn and grow without fear. Sometimes the most important battles were fought with compassion, and sometimes the greatest victory was simply letting children be children.